The man in the video was seen entering the house around 11:45 p.m., but the footage was blurry and unclear. When Hayes confronted Daniel, he brushed it off. "I was just dropping off some documents for James," Daniel explained, his voice calm and collected. But Hayes wasn't buying it. Why had Daniel been there so late? And why hadn't he mentioned it earlier? The investigation took a darker turn when the plumber who had been sent to inspect the basement discovered something chilling. Buried behind old furniture and forgotten boxes was a large, sealed container. Ravenswood had always been a peaceful town, where families lived in their perfect homes and gossip about the neighbors was more about who had the best lawn than anything sinister. The Carter family, with their immaculate bungalow on Elm Street, had always been the picture of suburban bliss. James Carter, a respected architect in his early 40s, was known for his meticulous attention to detail in both his work and his home life. His wife, Amelia, was the ideal homemaker, always present at school events, hosting charity galas, and maintaining a pristine household. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who were the epitome of polite, well-adjusted kids. Together, they presented the perfect family image, one that seemed to be without fault. But the day James disappeared, everything began to crumble. It was late on a Monday evening when Amelia first noticed her husband was late coming home. She had prepared dinner as usual, the scent of roasted chicken wafting through their cozy kitchen. By 9:30 p.m., when the food was cold and the children were tucked in bed, she knew something wasn't right. James had called earlier that afternoon to say he would be working late at the office on an important project. But by midnight, he still hadn't come home. Tearfully, she dialed the police, her voice trembling as she explained the situation. Detective Lucas Hayes was assigned to the case, a seasoned investigator who had worked in Ravenswood for over a decade. He had seen his fair share of cases, but this one felt different from the start. Amelia's distress seemed genuine, but there was an air of something unsettling in her behavior, a controlled, rehearsed sorrow that didn't sit right with Hayes. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The next morning, the police began their search of the Carter home. The house appeared to be as pristine as ever, with photos of the family displayed on the walls. But as Hayes made his way through the basement, he caught a faint, unpleasant odor. It was subtle, but it lingered in the air, something musty and sour. Amelia, trailing behind him, dismissed it as an issue with the plumbing, a smell that could be fixed with a simple repair. Hayes wasn't convinced, but the search turned up no immediate signs of foul play. It was a curious detail, but it didn't point directly to anything sinister. The more Hayes questioned Amelia about the night James disappeared, the more discrepancies he uncovered. Amelia spoke about James' work stress, his late nights, and his dedication to his career. But when asked about their recent conversations, Amelia hesitated. She couldn't quite recall the last time they had talked about their marriage or their future. It was as if she was avoiding something. The investigation led Hayes to speak with James' colleagues. One of them, a junior architect named Rachel, mentioned that James had been acting strangely in recent weeks. He was distracted, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, Rachel said. I think he was really struggling with his marriage. James had mentioned having doubts about his relationship with Amelia, and Rachel had noticed a shift in his behavior. He had become more withdrawn, more focused on his work, as if he were trying to distract himself from something deeper. This revelation piqued Hayes' curiosity. Why had James been unhappy? Had he suspected something about his wife? Hayes dug deeper, hoping the answers would emerge. As the investigation progressed, Detective Hayes found himself increasingly suspicious of the dynamics between Amelia and her best friend, Daniel Brooks. Daniel was a successful entrepreneur who had recently moved back to Ravenswood after a few years away. He had a reputation for being charming, persuasive, and calculating, a man who could sell anything to anyone. He often visited the Carter home, always at Amelia's side during this difficult time. The neighbors noticed, too. Their interactions seemed oddly intimate, and the way Daniel comforted Amelia seemed more personal than platonic. Hayes started to question Daniel. He was a man of wealth, used to getting what he wanted, and his sudden presence in the Carter household struck Hayes as convenient. The more he looked into Daniel's history, the more his suspicions grew. Daniel had a reputation for being involved with wealthy women, and his recent success had come from a string of lucrative business deals. But the most unsettling thing Hayes learned was that Daniel had known James for years. They had been friends since college, but there was an underlying tension between them, something Hayes couldn't quite place. Amelia's behavior also continued to raise red flags. Despite her tearful public appearances, her actions behind the scenes were calculated and cold. Hayes dug into the couple's financial records and discovered that James had recently altered his will. The new will left everything to Amelia, making her the sole beneficiary of James' substantial wealth. That alone was a red flag, but there was more. Amelia had also made large purchases in the weeks leading up to James' disappearance. Expensive jewelry, clothes, and a lavish vacation. Expenses that James had not approved. When Hayes questioned Amelia about the changes to the will, she became defensive, claiming that James had made those changes long before his disappearance. She insisted that their marriage was fine, despite the evidence to the contrary. But as Hayes probed further, he began to piece together a troubling narrative. Then, a breakthrough came. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station captured a man resembling Daniel arriving at the Carter home late on the night James disappeared. The man in the video was seen entering the house around 11:45 p.m., but the footage was blurry and unclear. When Hayes confronted Daniel, he brushed it off. "I was just dropping off some documents for James," Daniel explained, his voice calm and collected. But Hayes wasn't buying it. Why had Daniel been there so late? And why hadn't he mentioned it earlier? The investigation took a darker turn when the plumber who had been sent to inspect the basement discovered something chilling. Buried behind old furniture and forgotten boxes was a large, sealed container. When the police opened it, they found the decomposed body of James Carter, wrapped tightly in plastic. The smell in the basement, initially dismissed as a plumbing issue, had been the unmistakable odor of death. The police quickly realized that James had been murdered, and the manner in which his body had been disposed of suggested a cold, calculated plan. The vessel in which his body had been placed had been sealed with care, almost as if someone had known the smell would need to be contained. The discovery sent shockwaves through the town, and the investigation now had a clear direction: murder. With the body of James found, the case quickly escalated. Forensic evidence revealed that the murder had been brutal, with signs of blunt force trauma to the head. The weapon, a heavy, bloodied sculpture, was found hidden in Amelia's closet, further implicating her. Her fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, and traces of James' blood were found on her clothing. Amelia's denial of any involvement became harder to believe. At this point, Detective Hayes focused his attention on the relationship between Amelia and Daniel. He uncovered a trail of suspicious activity between the two. Bank records showed that Daniel had made large transfers to an account in Amelia's name, transactions that suggested they were planning something together. A private investigator hired by Hayes also revealed that Amelia and Daniel had been meeting frequently in secret, often in secluded spots like local parks and cafes. Witnesses described their conversations as intimate, and there was little doubt in Hayes' mind that they were more than just friends. When confronted with the mounting evidence, Amelia broke down. In a moment of weakness, she confessed that Daniel had been the one to strike the fatal blow to James, but she claimed that she had not known the full extent of his plan. She maintained that she had only been involved to a certain degree, lured into the scheme by Daniel's charm and promises of a better life. But forensic evidence told a different story. Amelia's fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, and it was clear that she had been deeply involved in the murder. Daniel, realizing the walls were closing in, finally confessed. He admitted that he and Amelia had conspired to kill James in order to claim his wealth. The plan had been carefully orchestrated, with Amelia luring James into the basement under the guise of a romantic surprise. There, Daniel had struck James with the sculpture, killing him instantly. The body had been sealed in the vessel and hidden in the basement, where it would be discovered later, after they had set their alibis in place. trial of Amelia and Daniel Brooks became the focus of national media attention. The courtroom was filled with journalists and onlookers, all eager to hear the details of the crime that had rocked the peaceful town. The prosecution laid out a strong case, presenting forensic evidence, witness testimony, and Daniel's confession. They painted a picture of two cold-blooded individuals who had conspired to kill a man who had loved them both deeply. Amelia's defense team attempted to shift the blame entirely onto Daniel, portraying her as a victim who had been manipulated into participating in the murder. But the jury wasn't swayed. The evidence was overwhelming, and Amelia's actions in the weeks leading up to James' death revealed a woman driven by greed and a desire for luxury. The jury convicted both Amelia and Daniel of premeditated murder, and they were sentenced to life in prison without parole. The town of Ravenswood was left reeling, the image of the perfect family forever shattered.